I am Netuversitan. Now, you might be asking, what happened with Garnet while Virgilius was dealing with that Docent? Well, that's what this book will be covering. Previously on Leviathan. Virgilius, the Red Gaze, and Garnet. His rookie fixer incapacitated their guide and searched the corridor for the lab. After Garnet showed that he paid attention during his basic training to be a 7 Association affiliated fixer, they encountered a Docent, specifically the one they fought previously, and considering that there was no guide, she was and attacked them. Virgilius punched her to the other end of the corridor, and then loaned Garnet his Gladius and coats to aid him in continuing the mission, while Virgilius dealt with the Docent, rushing to her with blistering speed. Thanks to his augmentations, he broke through a door and into a surreal scene with doors all over and a bottomless abyss for any unfortunate to fall down, that fight being less one-sided than before, but he was able to get her into a position to make her fall. She attempted to take him with her, but he had a surprise for her. He had something that allowed him to augment his abilities, something that was fueled by emotion, possibly a psychoment/EGO. In this case, the emotions that fueled his ability augmentation were hope and despair, specifically on the day that the orphanage was destroyed. This was enough for him to emerge victorious. As for who she is that he mentioned instructed him in that power, well, considering that the power of light was mentioned, there are 3 suspects: Carmen, Iori, and Moses. Well, Carmen could have instructed him before the bloodbath instance. As for Iori, well, it's a weak case, but she can help others if her plans require it. As for Moses, she's probably the most knowledgeable about psychoments outside of the library. Well, she certainly has a workshop operator that knows a bit as well. The story continues as we catch up to Garnet, who was, after running from the fight between Virgilius and the Docent on his order, his legs felt like stones. This was the first time he and Virgilius were separated since arriving there. It was weighing on him, and not just with what was going on in that gallery. As Virgilius was helping him with work and was being kept company by the other fixers, which limited his role. A role that he was starting to question. But then he considered that the footsteps that he was taking, heavy though they were his first leap towards being an independent fixer. I see you have ambitions to walk down the same path as the Red Mist. Last I checked, she worked alone, although she was like the Zwei specialization, as she was determined to protect those that hired her. In fact, in the end, at least with her first life, it wasn't about the money as far as she was concerned. Well, regarding being an independent fixer, he sighed at this. He saw the narrow and unfathomable unbelievably long corridor, worrying if he went the wrong way, if the door handle was booby-trapped, or if it would lead to the right place, or even if he'd encounter a foe that would likely mutilate him and use his remains as an exhibit in the gallery, if he's fortunate. Then he remembered Virgilius's words, "Take my gladius." He thought that he was given that because he couldn't fully trust his own abilities. Well, I can understand that, as you don't have all the augmentations and gear yet. Also, that Gladius and Kos is not something that Virgilius would loan Garnet lightly. It shows that he has enough faith in Garnet to continue with the mission. With this in mind, he endeavoured to repay this trust, such as it was, by doing what was next right, assuming that was the case. With this in mind, he was able to pull himself together, his doubts dismissed for now. He saw doors that looked identical, with numbers out of order. Well, all that's missing is an encounter with an Alice in Wonderland-themed abnormality. There's certainly at least one of those. I think it's in Wonderlab. Well, he slowly retraced Lan Yen's intel and the footage Lapis risked her life to film. He remembered the starting point and the goal from that video. Room 718. He was close. He also remembered eye, fragment and glass, which was the mental keyword door lock. Or more specifically, what was needed for him to think in order for the door to unlock. He felt tense, but he loosened up as he entered the open door. He was now in the lab, with each step taken. Much was going on in his head. He remembered a past lesson. The Seven Association seminar advised him to hold his breath for a moment and to keep his ears open for possible footsteps when approaching the corridor, due to the possibility of a trap or an ambush. He heard the loud sound of his own saliva being swallowed, or at least it seemed loud as he was nervous. He saw two people around the corridor. He had an element of surprise as he was just around the corner. They weren't aware of his presence. He considered his options. The corridor was too clean. He couldn't hide behind objects, so stealth was not an option. Conflict was unavoidable. Thankfully, Rikoko was able to provide some pointers before they proceeded with their roles. She told him that he had to be aware of his limits, to know what he can and can't do in battle. With this in mind, the Gladius was in his hands, and he was ready for battle. Garnet thought that she was insightful, even though her stare bothered him. He knew that using the same kind of surprise attacks that Virgilius could do were outside of his current ability, and not just due to him lacking the required augmentations. It would more likely get him killed, and that would end his career, and also his life, quickly. He needed a better plan. He considered looking sloppy, to appear as an inept fixer to cause them to drop their guard and then lunge at them, closing his distance while he confuses them, then bracing themselves to attack him, going for his left arm as that's the first part that they'll see. Then he'll thrust the Gladius with his right arm, willing to risk losing his left arm, Yeah, he can get a new one fitted, although they're more expensive if they're frequently used body parts, as well, it's trickier to replicate muscle mass and nerve compatibility. An added complication, meaning that it shouldn't be done unless it's needed, which was the case with a certain detective. This force makes Garnet feel pathetic, making plans under the premise that he's expecting to be mutilated. It made more sense for him to find a way of getting through it without the need for cybernetic replacements. Yeah, he's such a milksop. Well, he's a grade 9, so he's only just started. I mean, even the colour fixers didn't get to the ability that they ended up getting to overnight. He heard the footsteps of what was approaching. They were sounding closer than they were previously. There was no time to come up with a strategy. Yes, he was a pushover, so he needed to do what he can to win this fight. He leaped at the target, surprising them. He barely noticed the two terrified researchers. They didn't sign up for this with the idea that they might be threatened by a fixer. These two were clearly the underachievers as far as combat was concerned. They reached into their coats, looking for a weapon. He was giving them an exploitable opening. He moved his left arm towards them. Then he stabbed the Gladius into the heart of one of them. Much to his surprise, he questioned if they were panicking too much to attack. As for the coats, Virgilius clearly went to a good quality tailor, as the blade that the researcher that he stabbed, well, it stops in its tracks, protecting his left arm, which explains why the Red Gaze loaned him that as well. He didn't have long to feel gratitude towards this, as the other researcher was scared and wanted to defend themselves against this surprisingly deadly intruder. Garnet swung the Gladius to hit the blade of the dagger that they were wielding. Then he heard a strange click from the hit, much to the surprise of both of them. The Steamer Workshop tech activated in the Gladius and cut the blade of the dagger, or whatever the weapon that's depicted here, as if it was ice cream. Wait, they have ice cream? It's like they made from some kind of dairy alternative, unless there's a wing that deals in meat production and dairy farming. Anyway, Garnet realized what was going on, as he saw that not only the weapon was split in two, but also the second researcher. Yeah, Virgilius knew his weapons, and you haven't even seen that he has a possible psychomant. Garnet. As for the coat, Virgilius must have some strong connections to be able to buy the fabric needed to make that coat. Certainly a coat that durable. It's something that you need a membership with a tailor to make that possible. Anyway, after focusing on how effective the weapon and the coats were, he felt a little guilt over killing the two ring affiliates. But that guilt quickly went away after he remembered that they were experimenting on those that they abducted, which has already killed a number of them. He looked for those being tortured and ran across the corridor. He was looking for Lapis specifically. Whatever he saw in that footage, it was worse being there in person. His friends resting in discomfort after their torture sessions. Yes, torture sessions that didn't kill them. It made his stomach turn. Then he heard familiar voices, speaking of refraction rate and the dangers of it getting too high. It was Rikoko and Nancyul in their M-Corp attire, as part of their cover as Moonlight Stone couriers. Some researchers were explaining the experiment. The two fixers glanced in the direction of Garnet. Rikoko nudged her chin and Nancyul gave the thumbs up, discreetly. Having heard as much as they needed to, Rikoko alerted Nancyul and Garnet to take action. Rikoko punched one researcher in the stomach, and Nancyul knocked another researcher out by choking them from behind, while Rikoko took out 3 more. It took less than 5 minutes to knock all 7 researchers in that lab out, with Garnet knocking the last one out, although he knew he had a long way to go before he could even afford the gear and the augmentations that would allow him to be on the level of the more experienced fixers that he was with. Nancyul praised him for getting there by himself, but Rikoko wasn't that impressed, as she could see that Virgilius loaned him his sword and coats, while beating those that were even more inept at combat than him. Nancyul pointed out that she was cheering for him while they fought, but she claimed that it was because it was insufferable to watch. This quarrelling, for some reason, was a relief for Garnet, understanding that it's how they deal with these field jobs. Garnet told them that Virgilius will be back soon, asking how things were going on their side of it. Rikoko told him that they figured out the controls and how the machines worked, which wasn't a half-bad record, despite Nancyul being a bungalow of machines. He protested that he only struggled one time. Rikoko was amused by this, saying that when she was his grade, she just needed a glimpse to figure it out, believing that fixers at this time were raised too soft. You mean things were worse in the past? Well, considering how Kali, the Red Mist, was raised, you're not off by much, Rikoko. Garnet's heart beat with anticipation with Rikoko's words. Apparently, she and Nancyul have the infiltration role, disguised as Moonlight Stone couriers from M-Corp, as they have higher fixer grades, more due to various professional certifications than combat experience. Yeah, if they wanted combat specialists, that's what the She Association and the Liu Association are for. Skilled personnel were needed to deal with the technical side, as careless handling will result in a repeat of what happened in the video footage. Apparently Denver stated that Rikoko kept Nancyul around, even though she kept scolding him as if it was a daily ritual, because he had skills worth developing. Yeah, Denver said that Rikoko wouldn't have talked to him in the first place if he was an actual lost cause, giggling as she said that. 2 capable fixers lessened Garnet's worry. Garnet wanted to know how to rescue his friends, but the other 2, they had different priorities. They were cold to this idea. Rikoko was, well, she was understanding, as this was his first true field mission, telling him that the primary objective is to seize that singularity. Garnet remembered this, that fixers were motivated by the sense of interests. that he should grow accustomed to this. It's rare to find an idealist fixer. Callie and Virgilius are only two examples. Most of the rest are either insane or self-serving. Garnet noted that, with their knowledge of the controls, they could stop the machines now and get the subjects out, while not demanding that they push everything aside to save them. Nunzial then spoke of something that made this more complicated. They could do that, but they can't do that without resetting the data of the machines, which, as Rikoko added, would result in them losing the chance of seizing that singularity. Yeah, that takes priority at this point. Her priorities being based on value. The one that has less worth, well, that's discarded, if it can't be achieved. Remaining level-headed during these field missions is how she rose through the grades. Garnet was in wonder at this, seeing himself as an immature rookie who whines when things don't go as expected. An incompetent fledgling, unfit to work as a fixer, not being thought of as a colleague at all. At least, that's what Garnet fears that she sees him as. He questions if she would feel the same way if those within the tubes had a personal connection to her. Even so, he asked what if something happened while downloading that data. Unreasonable as it sounds, Rikoko asks what if they did open the tubes after hearing that, to save them and then lose all the data. What next? As they need some kind of leverage to use in their favour to get out of there alive, after provoking the ring. Yeah, Virgilius has just killed a docent and Garnet has killed 2 lower-ranked researchers. Never mind knocking out the others and breaking and entering. Nunzial wanted her to stop this, but she continued this beratement of this inexperienced rookie. She knew that Virgilius could handle himself, as he's a colour fixer, but the rest of the people in their office, yeah. She asked if he was prepared to bear the responsibility of all of them, spending the rest of their lives being chased by the ring. In that case, Moses' office might have a problem, unless it's not as bad as it was in that case. Either that or all witnesses were killed. Yes, that involved the fun. Well, if that's the case, it's no problem for them at all. With the case of Virgilius and his fixers, that's a problem, as they've just attacked a high-profile area that the ring operates in. Garnet was agonized by his own behavior. He was staring down at his feet, unable to stand his ground against her argument. He thought that he was ready to face this. When he asked for Virgilius's help over the payphone, he knew that saving Lapis was an arduous ordeal, that with help that he'd be able to do this. But in reality, overcoming hardship was the preserve of those with the power to make that possible. Rikoko and Nunzial planned ahead, considering the consequences of their actions, what the ring is capable of, what ramifications there would be. Yeah, ramifications. Such as what would happen if they were to do the equivalent of in their artworks. Yes, they considered what losses it would have, and the gains it would reap if successful. Yes, success. That's what matters in the end, doesn't it? He told them that he knew all of the children in the tubes by name. The soured sweetness of half-melted candy still in his memory, along with the chilly breaths used to make drawings on frosted windows when the heaters broke. He knew all of them. It was hitting him hard, weighing the lives of his adoptive siblings against profit and loss. Yeah, even in our world, to some, it all comes down to money. In the end, he's unsure if they're right. But it's upsetting that it sounds right, and he doesn't know what he can say to prove her wrong. Nunziul then basically said to him, "Welcome to reality. That's the wall of helplessness. Get used to it. What you're thinking is a fantasy." Although the way he put it was kinder than how I put it. Rikoko added that it's a hurdle every fixer has to go through in order to become a high-caliber workforce, asking Nunziul if that's the case, noting that he used to be a big ditzy himself. He said that he's used to it. Well, yes, used to it by now. Although there was some hesitation. Either he's hiding it better than Garnet, or it's the mental attack of what he was transporting that was still lingering. Garnet compared himself to a larva, starting to make his cocoon. The pain he feels here will mold him into a butterfly. Life without pain has no meaning. Well, you'll certainly get plenty of meaning by the time this is done, Garnet. Assuming that you live that long. Rikoko then got the other two back to the task at hand, telling Nunziul to make better use of the lab space since there's no one to interrupt them, but not to take too long. He entered the control room and worked with the panels. Garnet muttered that he could still save them, as the other two are quick with their work. A chance will exist once they're finished with the singularity. He had this in his head as he guarded the entrance, ready to defend against any ring thugs that might appear. Unfortunately, he heard the clanking of shoes coming from inside the control room. This was coming from Maestro Jumsun, the auctioneer from before. I wouldn't be surprised if Garnet needed a change of underwear, even with the gear that Virgilius loaned him. Rikoko was surprised that Maestro Jumsun was there, as were the others. The Maestro had figured it out. He now knew that Virgilius joining the auction was a diversion, while the others snuck inside the lab. He was surprisingly calm, considering that the ring thugs and researchers were on the floor, understanding that it's not just the children that they were trying to extract, but the singularity as well, believing that he should have listened to the docent that was now dead, unknown to her this time. Rikoko warned her not to come a step closer, knowing how important that technology was, threatening to destroy all the data that they've gathered. As she held a lever, Master Jumsun had a vacant expression. It turned out that he had another way of entering that lab. Either that or he went ahead of them. He was there long enough to overhear their conversation, noting how fond they were on realities. or rather of realities. Then, despite Rikoko's confusion, he then continued his talk about reality, people and their obsession with it. He, on the other hand, was averse to that word. Then, Nuncio stabbed Rikoko in the back, impaling her abdomen. This made her frown in pain, staggering her, while Nuncio was calm. I think it's clear, based on that, what Sim Nuncio was. He was working for the Ring. It seems that they appear to utilize infiltrators of their own. Apparently, he agreed to help them when Virgilius and the others, including him, were getting their operation ready. He knew that a grade 3 like him stood no chance, which implies that Rikoko is at least grade 2, or perhaps even a grade 1. Yeah, Rikoko, he sunk that low to betray all of you. Nuncio then used her own words to justify his actions. That being, you don't put others in your priorities when you can't take responsibility for their survival. Yeah, that's the typical fixer attitude. The moment they outlast their usefulness, you discard them. Nuncio even considered trying to convince her to join him, but he knew that she doesn't mingle with others easily, telling her that it's reality for him, seeing nothing is too low. Rikoko didn't have anything left to say. Either that or she was too tired to say anything as she collapsed. Garnet was about to ask why would he betray them to the Ring, but he stopped as Nuncio was amused by this. Garnet was starting to think that if this was reality, where it's everyone for themselves, the pupa shouldn't have left the cocoon in the first place, where sensible pain is a contradiction in terms, much like military intelligence. But it turns out that Master Jumsun was expecting him, which explains why Nuncio didn't move against him next. It was likely he was more useful to them alive. Jumsun gave up on the gem that he was. Well, he used to, as the red gaze was in the way, and it didn't help that he became a fixer. It made what he wanted to do a hassle. This surprised Garnet. He was waiting for him? Then the villain monologue continued, as he explained to the rookie fixer that he aimed to create uncompromising perfection. But his decision to be a fixer caused a deviation that almost made him compromise with reality, and undermine the integrity of his art. Now, that would have made him unhappy, if that was to happen. Yeah. Garnet's friends and himself were seen as materials for some twisted work of art. This made him feel a strong anger that was blazing inside him, asking why it had to be his friends. What grudge did Master Jumsun have with the Red Gaze? Those children were destitute, that wanted to get as much enjoyment of life as they can. Why inflict misfortune on them? Garnet, some people don't need a reason. They do things like that simply because they can. But it turned out that Jumsun had no ill feelings towards them. He chose the orphanage, where the miracle occurred. Now, this confused Garnet, as the children at the orphanage were making the most of their situation. Then he realized what she... Well, what he meant. But to him, it was the exact opposite of a miracle. It was a curse. It was that day, where on Christmas Eve, Tomeri, the mass of flesh, attacked the orphanage, where he and Lapis were fortunate to survive the attack, which caused Virgilius to stop visiting the orphanage. That was what she called a miracle? Jumsun confirmed this to be the case. This made Garnet's body overwhelmed with fury. His head was broiling with rage. Rage gained through personal loss. Jumsun saw this as the beginning of everything. The starting point of innumerable worlds that they will unravel from now on. The gallery was planning to make something fascinating for a good while, dedicating utmost care to every step of it, not settling for any less than what is chosen by the world, asking if he's heard the cry of the thirst to be resurrected, to return from the scattered light, likely referring to what Angela did towards the end of Library of Ruina, as she dealt with her remaining personal loose ends. As he was saying this, his voice was reflecting his passion for this. He then ordered his lapdog Nancyul to pull the yellow lever all the way up. Garnet doesn't want this to be what he thinks this is, but it was clear to him that his efforts were for naught, that everything will start falling apart right before his eyes, that it was caused by Nancyul, and Lapis was doomed. Nancyul pulled the lever as Garnet was sprinting towards him, but he was frozen in place. He realized Rococo's words, which were harsh, yet true. This was reality. And it sucked. Then an announcement was made by a dry, mechanical voice. It said,
Disjoint world's identity, superposition device activated. Initiating refraction rate intensification sequence. Target maximum refraction.
This caused a lot of humming to fill the lab. Rifts were opening, which made something shatter within Garnet, impaled by the stake that is reality. This raises further questions. Was Tomori lured into that area by the ring to get Virgilius away from that orphanage after its destruction, in order for them to secure the children, and Iori the Purple Tear was just there and wanted to pick a fight with him to start off a chain of events that led to some unknown goal? Or did she lure Tomeri there to cause that destruction to start off a chain of events involving Virgilius that the ring only exploited? Who knows? She's someone that can think multiple moves ahead in multiple different directions. Whichever the case, we at least now know what the device is called. The Disjointed World's Identity Superposition Device. A bit of a mouthful, I know, but it's a device that allows someone to gain access to the abilities of an alternate version of themselves in another universe. How that ties into Limbus Company, I suspect that's what will eventually be revealed, as this device sounds disturbingly relevant to that. Yes, the identities mechanic. It sounds like all this suffering is not to give the ring an advantage over the other fingers. It's not even to make the ring one of the wings of the world, likely through some proxy. It's to create an artwork from the children and others unlike any that exists within the city. I suspect that's why Seo of the Kurokumo clan hinted at what the ring would do if they were operating within District 12's nest. Considering that the ring are a bunch of artistically obsessed nutjobs, I can see why she would say that about them, based on this. It'd certainly be a wing candidate based on their total disregard for life in the pursuit of results and profits. It turns out that Rikoko is likely to be the first to die of Virgilius' office, and if he finds out that Nunzial has become a turncoat that killed her and sold out to the ring, I suspect that Nunzial will live just long enough to regret his decision. As for Garnet, he's being used as a test subject. Although they've clearly not knocked him out and put him in a test tube, as that's something that would secure them from any counterattacks. This impatience might bite the ring in the later, but that will have to wait until book 14. It looks like that Garnet is in for a rough time, even by Fixer standards, as that's where the story will likely continue. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!